Welcome to another session of Rav Kook Yomi. It is so nice to be with you here today, whether you're listening to us online on Facebook or on Zoom or whatever it may be. I'm so happy to be with you here today. We're going to continue on learning Orot and order here, and we are in the Milchama section, the war section. And we're in the second teaching from the war section. And it begins like this. Anu mistaklim bedorot harishonim. When we look and gaze into the prior generations, into the first generations, and you might say, who, right? Like what prior generations? Obviously, a lot of prior generations in Judaism. Amusuparim beTorah b'nevi'im v'ktuvim otam hadorot shahayu asukim b'milchama. And he defines it specifically those heroes, those people from the past that were in the Torah and in the prophets and in the writing section, meaning all of the heroes that we actually hear about in the Tanakh, right? And specifically, I think when we're thinking about the wars that we're told about in the different sections, I'm really thinking about Judges and Joshua and real warriors like that, who really, there were these great wars to conquer the land, to gain control of the land, and to make sure that it was protected and safe. And so when you read the Hebrew scriptures, you really do read a lot about war, and this seems to be lacking from rabbinic texts, Kabbalistic texts, and almost all later texts of Jewish literature don't really include anything about war or actually like doing war. Talmud discusses laws about war, that if a Jewish nation went to war, how would they behave, et cetera, et cetera. But there's very little recording of actual war and examples of this. And so we really have to look back to the Bible in this way, which is pretty far back in Jewish history. He says, V'hem hem hagdolim she'anu mityachasim aleihem b'yididut uv'gdulat kodesh, right? That we look back at those great ones, those heroes from the past, those great heroes, and we connect to them with love and intimacy and with great holiness. What he's saying here, and I think this represents sort of what ended up becoming, sort of a trend within, especially within early Zionism, but still today, was to look back at the biblical heroes that oftentimes were overlooked. Jews don't talk a lot about Yiftach, or Devorah, or even Joshua and all these great wars that were fought to defend the land. We don't talk about the Maccabees often, the people who fought to fend off the Greeks, and create an independent Jewish commonwealth. We don't talk about these people as much. Most of our tradition comes from a time when the Jewish people weren't sovereign in any way. And so it comes from the rabbinic literature. Other literature comes from a different perspective. But when we actually look at the Bible, it's something that's actually happening in the land of Israel. It's happening at a time of Jewish sovereignty, and there are actual biblical heroes who are warriors, who are fighting. And so for the small group, the group of Jews who were making Aliyah to Eretz Israel in the 1910s and the 1920s, they were looking for heroes. They were looking for role models, in groups of people dealing with challenges that no one had dealt with in Judaism for a long time, which was militarily defending one's land and one's community and one's neighborhood. And so they looked back at these biblical heroes and really were inspired by them. And so this is still an ongoing trend in Israel today. And I find it to be very inspiring, to recreate what it looks like, what a Jewish sovereign nation that protects itself looks like. So he continues, Hinenu mevinim, behold, we understand shehazik hanishmati hu yasod. Right? So he says, we understand that the spark the soul spark is the foundation. Oto ma'amad ha'olam, he's going to explain it. Their world pillar, their support that they formed, erected the entire world. Shahalach merutza to'az, shaita milchama kol kach nechutza bo, hu garam lahofia et ela hanishamot. Right? That what he's saying here is that they were involved with war so much, right? They were really truly involved with war and were sort of used to it. And it caused actually their soul to be revealed in the world, right? Because we learned in our previous mamar, we learned in our previous teaching from Rav Kook that a good war, a war that is fought to protect one's own survival and one's own land and one's own community, that really is a fight against evil, that is a fight against wickedness, true wickedness, not a war for more power or for economic gain or something like that, or hatred of somebody else, but rather to protect oneself against people who hate you, right? That actually enables the revelation of the soul. And these people who did this before should really be inspiring to us and should be able to establish us when we look back at them and think about them. Sheher gashatan hapnimit betochan shalem haita, that their inner feeling and their inner sensitivity to who they were and their Judaism and their Jewishness was much more felt and much more realized, because again, fighting for what you believe in, like really fighting, right? If it's really for the right cause and for the right reason, really does bring out a whole entire new dimension of who you are and really helps you manifest that cause in a very serious way. Milchemet Kumam, the war for their survival, meaning an existential war, a war that threatened their very existence. Kuma Uma, a war that threatened the existence of the nation as a whole. Milchemet Hashem Haita Bahakara Pinimit. They realized it was a war of God. And they recognized this in their inner being, right? That this wasn't just a war just for the sake of survival and that's it, but it was a divine war, right? This was almost a mitzvah, a commandment, something where God truly is involved and God is revealed through this war itself. And I think, again, we can relate this to Israel today, right? We see Israel fighting for its existential survival. And it's very different than a war, that's fought overseas or we've seen a lot of wars fought for economic reasons or power reasons or hatred reasons, but a war fought to survive. Something like the 1967 war or eventually the War of Independence. Of course, Rav Kook never saw any of these, but he sort of prophesized it, right? And I would say also as well, the war at the present moment in Gaza and against Hamas, against Iran, right? These are wars for existential survival. And in doing so, when we fight these righteous wars, they are revelations of godliness. Judaism is not a pacifistic religion. That's important. I think a lot of people make a mistake to think that Judaism is a pacifistic religion when they look at rabbinic literature or they look at Kabbalistic literature and they don't see, rabbis fighting and warriors in the same way. And they think, well, that's the ideal. That's how we should be, right? We should never fight, right? And violence is wrong in all different ways. But that really is not, I think, an unfair conclusion, because you're looking at a people who are writing and thinking at a time when they're completely powerless. They don't have a sovereign nation. They're living at the grace of whatever kingdom or place they're living in, and they have no power. So they're writing from a place of powerlessness. So rabbinic literature and later rabbinic literature after the destruction of the temple and the expulsion of the Jewish people from the land of Israel by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, after that, Jewish literature until 1948, until like this basically, was pacifistic, because again, there was no sovereignty, and you have to be pacifistic if you have no sovereignty, right? So again, Rav Kook is trying to define and find role models of what Jewish sovereignty and Jewish nationhood looks like and how God can be revealed in a unique way, which is why he's looking at these judges, and he's looking at these biblical characters who really did fight for inspiration. He continues. Azizim hayu berucham beyedu be'emek hachoshech livchor betov l'sor min hara, right? And they were so strong in their spirit, and they knew in the depths of the darkness to choose good and to turn asunder from evil, right? And they were able to behave morally even at these times of darkness, the times of war, the times when you're seeing great evil and great horrible things. They were able to have the courage and the audacity to choose good even at those moments. Why? Because it was an important existentialist war for the survival of the Jewish people in their land, right? That enabled them to act righteously, right? If you're fighting in a war that's not for righteous reasons, it's not for holy reasons, then what ends up happening to those who fight those battles is they become morally repugnant, right? They become morally contaminated. But those who fight wars to defend their people, for their very existential survival, it is very, very different. And it actually is truly enables them to actually have real moral clarity, right? That's why there really is no moral clarity when you're acting as a pacifist and you're acting as someone who refuses to fight at all and defend one's freedoms and one's liberty and one's sovereignty in one's own land. All right, there is sort of a moral repugnancy, a moral contamination that happens because you end up saying, well, if I can't fight, then I have to make this deal and I have to do this and I have to compromise on things that, are really essential, right? And there has to be a point of moral clarity when a people says enough is enough. We're not going to be destroyed. We're going to defend ourselves with pride. And within that is godliness. And he quotes this from the Psalm in Psalm 23, the famous line, Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet, that when we walk in the shadow of death, lo ira ra, I will not fear evil, right? Why? Because the war in which these Jews were fighting in biblical times were godly, which is really important. It's an amazing way to look at that, and especially look at that verse from a warrior's mentality, right? The shadow of the valley of death is fighting in a war, right? How do you maintain your moral clarity in that? And I think that's going to be very dependent on Israel, that Israel continues to fight wars that are morally clarifying or morally right, they're existential battles, and not get pushed into battles for power or battles for economic gain or for all other kinds of reasons. And if they do that, if they fight for their own existential survival, it is a revelation of godliness and also a revelation of moral clarity as well. When we contemplate them, hinenu, behold, we were able to experience the appearance and the revelation of a spirituality that we so much yearn for. We yearn for their power and their courage. For their strength and their vitality of life and their strength in their goodness and their toughness. To be that really strong tree that is firmly placed in the ground, that dwells within them. And within this desire and this yearning to be strong like this and to defend oneself. Our own spiritual strength becomes stronger and more vibrant, and our power becomes more flourishing, more beautiful, right? Because we're using power used in a good way, in a correct way, in a moral way, is beautiful. There's something beautiful and pleasant about it and wonderful about it, and expands. And he ends by saying, and when we contemplate on these people and draw inspiration from them and try to act like them and use them as role models, our own souls grow strong. Or those souls grow strong again in the returning back to life, just like the days of old, right? So that the IDF soldier today who was fighting an existential war for the Jewish people, for the nation of Israel, is almost like a resurrection of the biblical warrior, right? It's tying the fight for Israel now back to those biblical paradigms that were truly godly wars. And what Rav Kook, I think, is trying to show is that those who are fighting for the land of Israel in his time, which already fighting was certainly happening, there were definitely, I don't know if the Haganah was technically established by then, but definitely Jewish fighting forces were active at the time. And this was a great debate of how people should fight. And really, he's drawing that, and it was mostly secular though. But what he's able to do is to say you can be a religious person, right, and find a Jewish religious model of what a warrior looks like. And I think that is really inspiring to me, really meaningful to me, and especially in the debates that Israel's having right now over Haredi enlistment, and everything like this. I think it shows a wonderful paradigm of what a religious Jewish warrior could look like. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll be here, Mizrat Hashem, tomorrow at 11, again, continuing with the third teaching from HaMilchama. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.